If you have a Detroit Series 60 14 liter and your wastegate actuator for your turbo is leaking air right here, anywhere around this gasket, I'll show you what I did to fix it. So just for quick reference before we get into it, you'll hear me later talk about distance for this shaft that goes to that wastegate actuator. What you're going to want to do is, once this is off, completely off and on the bench, you're going to want to measure from the top of this plate to the center of that hole and record that measurement, because that makes a difference. You need to, once you take this apart, put it back together, that distance has to be exactly the same. You're just going to want to see that. And also probably the hardest part of this project is getting that back bolt out in the back there. I had to run an extension down through there at an angle with a wobble socket on it and a extension out to here on a 1/4-inch drive to get it. But other than that, it's those 3 bolts. Put a little pressure on the rod to pull this clip out and pull this pin out the side, and take the air connection, 5/8 inch air connection off the back. Comes right out the bottom. So, a little bit of background. I bought that crane. Didn't have any issues with it surging a little bit. Like the turbos kicking in and out. Sprayed some, watching some YouTube videos, and sprayed some soapy water on that wastegate actuator, and it was bubbling. So the seal was no good, or there's a pinhole in the diaphragm, or something of that nature. Went round and round with it. Took it to, called some mechanic shops. They didn't want to mess with it. I guess you got to have the Detroit software, and it's a pain in the butt. So they say just take it to Freightliner. So I took it to Freightliner. They said it's 8 hours of labor to change out that one part. It only takes about 20 minutes to change it out. But 8 hours of setting the computer up to set the spring pressure. They didn't say spring pressure, but just to set it up. And I was like, how is that possible? Because I put the new one in, and it would idle, but as soon as you give it throttle, it would just blow black smoke and wouldn't get any power. So put the old one back in. It's fine. And the one I bought was $45 off of eBay, I believe. Freightliner wants $450, $460 for it, I believe. So I just bought one off eBay, and it's identical, same thing. And so I've just been fighting with it, and Freightliner told me, you know, if it's 8 hours of labor to do that, we just tell everybody just replace the whole turbo, because then we just put the turbo in, it's set up real quick. You don't have to set all those parameters for that wastegate actuator, and you got a new turbo. Anyways, okay, so now you're $5,000. And I was like, I can't afford that right now. So I brought it home, and I've been kicking it around and talked to some other mechanics, and just really never got anywhere with it, and tried to find videos on YouTube if you could rebuild the thing or not. Well, I finally just tore the new one apart, the $40 one, because I was like, well, I'm not going to use it, and let's see what's inside. And it was just like I thought. It was a diaphragm with air pressure that comes in underneath, and it pushes up on a spring. Well, the new one had a single narrow spring in it. So I pulled the old one off, pulled it apart, and it had 2 springs. It had that single narrow one. It had a bigger outside one, so it's going to have more resistance than that one. And I figured the only thing the computer's going to know is how much air pressure it takes to move that spring. So the only thing it's going to recognize is that spring. So I cleaned it up, took the old spring out, measured everything. Everything was exactly the same. The cup inside the new one to the cup inside the old one where the spring sat. And the only other thing you have to do, you have to measure your distance of your rod when it's off, to make sure that where the pin goes through that hooks to the wastegate, that distance is the same. Mine was 3 5/8 inches, I believe, to the center of the hole from the top plate. So you just got to match that. But other than that, pulled it apart, put that spring in there, put it back together, and got my 3 5/8 inches distance from the top cap to the center pin where it mounts. Threw it back in there, and it doesn't leak anymore, doesn't leak air, it runs better, and it costs me $40. And all I did was just take the old springs out of the old one and put it in the new one. And the seal, I was kind of concerned that the seal might only be a one-time seal. Once you smash it down, it's only good for once. But it's got grooves in it, and I put it on there, put it back together, and smashed it together, and it doesn't leak. We'll see how long it lasts, but if it doesn't leak now, it should be fine. If it did leak, I was going to put just a little bit of gasket maker silicone around it to try to seal it up, which I thought about doing that with the old one anyways, but it was pretty crusty inside. So I'll show you the parts and what it looks like inside. But if you're having that issue and you've got that wastegate actuator, that style, it worked for me. It cost me 40 bucks and it doesn't leak air anymore. So the system can run like it's supposed to. So worked for me. We'll see how long it lasts. I would imagine it should last as long as a brand new one being in there and them spending 8 hours to set it up. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. So let me get in the garage and I'll show you the parts. So here's the old wastegate actuator off the truck. It's got these funky T bits, star bits with that have a hollow center that can go over that pin right there. Luckily I had one. They're pretty tight, so you want to make sure you get the right size and get it in there. And it's under pressure because there's a spring in there. See, this is the spring that came in the new one. The old one, the original one, had this spring plus a bigger outer one that went over it. And that was the difference. The computer didn't recognize this pressure compared to what was in there. So all I did was just swap the springs out and put it back together. This cup was exactly the same size in the new one, so the springs fit in there perfect. This top cap was exactly the same size, has these same ridges right here. Basically identical. It doesn't have these sticking up out of the new one. It just had bolts that went down inside of it, which is no big deal. When you take it apart, there will be pressure on it. So what I did was I just ran the nut down tight. Once I pulled the piece out of the flange off that hooks to the actuator or the wastegate, I just ran the nut all the way down here tight. I would advise taking the nut off, putting a washer on here just to spread out the load a little bit better. Just run it down snug, and then you can pull all these bolts out. And once you pull those bolts out, that nut up here will have the spring tension on it, and then you just back the nut off, and then it takes the pressure off the spring, and it comes right off. Piece of cake, not much to it. When you do put it back together, you just want to make sure that all these little lines on these ridges match up perfectly, and it obviously goes back together in the exact same way it came apart. But that's about it. It's worked for me so far, and I just wanted to put it on here because I searched and searched and searched for a video like this showing the guts of this and if it's rebuildable and if it's not and what to do, and I couldn't find anything. So hopefully this helped somebody. It saved me a ton of money, and it's working out. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you and let you know.